we are hoping to host a session every month, something Azure related. So this Serverless Morning is the first one, and we have additional sessions and meetups prepared for the fall. Most of them has been invited to. Oh, okay, I see we have fixed it. It's Wednesdays. We have to see if the time slot is perfect, and they might change a little bit. But yeah, let's get back to that later. I think we can just begin. Martin, can you take over the presentation? And
yeah, let me just share my desktop. Okay, everyone see my slides there, or?
Yeah, we can see.
Yeah, cool. Thanks. Thanks, Anders, for the introduction. I had some minor technical issue logging into the Azure portal, but it's okay for now. I'm going to start with a brief description on how we built a serverless infrastructure based on PowerShell and some of the serverless offerings you have in Azure today. It is a talk prepared for around an hour, so we have to cut a few things down, but I hope you get the key points as well. Anyway. And also, I'm lucky that the slide deck is on English. So a little introduction for myself. My name is Martin Ehrnst, and I work as a technical lead for Azure at Intility. I used to work a lot with monitoring and with Azure and hybrid infrastructure. Now I try to contribute as much as possible to the Microsoft community via blogging and social media, and also some speaking in user groups and at other events. So let's just rush forward. And as I started with, it was as I started to say this, we wanted to build an infrastructure to help us onboard customers into our management system, and that's also included that we had to do some things with the customers' Azure tenants, either create a new one for our customers or sort of manage them through the partner service or a program from Microsoft. So that was the scope, and we wanted to run the service natively in Azure, and I also wanted it to be something that our developers can relate to. So we had to run infrastructure on continuous integration and stuff like that. So our full-time developers can easily bring that into their environment as well. So the process is that in order to kick off the infrastructure automation, you have to fill out the form, and then all this is sent to Azure and processed in the microservices and so on. You're going to see that later. My task was to create the first proof of concept of this infrastructure, but my problem is that I don't know any. I have limited knowledge in C# and I don't know any F or Go or languages like that. But I have more than 10 years experience working with infrastructure, so I do have some knowledge in PowerShell. And luckily, we are going to use Microsoft products, so PowerShell is something that we can use in most cases. So we use some time to try and to actually draw and out an infrastructure to see what products we had to use in order to be kind of modern and use tools like our developers use. So we got to this slide that I made yesterday. This is a really easy drawing of the infrastructure itself. So you have on the left hand you have a web front end which is producing which is actually the form you have to fill out, and the content of the form are sent as a JSON document to Azure Event Grid. So now Azure Event Grid acts like the hub for all events going back and forth within this infrastructure. So you can easily hook up with other subscribers easily to listen to the same events and stuff like that. So it's likely that if you have an event saying that a new customer has onboarded or are asking you to manage their Azure tenant, it could be interesting for other systems than the onboarding infrastructure to subscribe to the same event. So you can easily then hook other systems into the same events regardless of what their main purpose is. I don't know if there are any questions. Anders, can you just tell me that I will look at the chat
Absolutely.
afterwards? Yeah, thanks. I don't see the chat now when I'm going full screen. So when an event is sent to Event Grid, you will have multiple subscribers. Then in the drawing here, it's represented by Azure Functions and Azure Automation, but it could be almost every. You can have almost every product in Azure subscribed to Event Grid, and in the onboarding service, we used Key Vault to store credentials and for authentication throughout the whole process. And for each time a new subscriber is picking up the event, it's posting back to Event Grid for saying that it is finished, so that you can have either a new Azure function or a new automation runbook subscribing to the, let's say, the next step of the business process, because it is actually it's always a business process that you're trying to automate, and you can always I don't like to say always, but let's use that word now. You can split it up to multiple steps and very tiny steps that you can automate and integrate with each other. So you have Event Grid as the hub, and you have a spoke of subscribers and other services listening to the event that is happening. Just gonna skip the next slides, as we only have like 15 minutes left. So I'm going to demo mode. I couldn't actually show the onboarding of our Azure tenants in this demo, but I do have something I think everyone can relate to. You have the process, the business process of ordering a pizza and have it delivered at your house, or presumably your work, since you're working IT. So then you have some online form or an app where you are ordering the pizza, and it's sent to the pizza place, where it's where the where you have someone handling the incoming the incoming orders, and you have the business process of trying to prepare the pizza and cook it and to send it to delivery, and probably on a scooter or something before it's actually delivered to the person who ordered in the first place. So that's the main thing that this demo is showing, that you're linking all things together with Event Grid as a hub, and we are now running everything with Azure Function as with PowerShell. Let's go into the let's see. So this is the Event Grid topic. You have from my testing this morning, you will see that I have a graph showing the count of incoming events, and below you have all my subscribers. So I have named this as the naming is prefixed with what they are going to handle, and the suffix is that this is a function, and if it was an automation runbook, maybe you say something around that. You will have to specify something that Microsoft is calling a prefix and a suffix if you're not going to subscribe to all events. So now this is, as you will see later, this is actually just a string called subject when you are sending the message. So you have to choose yourself what the suffix and the prefix actually are. So just use some kind of logic that you can relate to when you're building up out your infrastructure. You see that the new order function is set up like this. It has a webhook. It's a webhook endpoint type, which is supported by Azure Functions, and it is this is the prefix and the suffix filters. I am running all Azure Functions, so everything is going to be sent to the same Azure Function app, but the concept is still valid. So this is the function subscribing to the new order event. It is pretty simple stuff. You have to use this. You receive the event as a post request. So you have to you can convert it from JSON in PowerShell, and you can work with it as normal PowerShell objects. And then I am getting the order ID from this pizza order, and I am later down posting a new event with the subject, including the order ID, so you can track the process of if you have multiple orders coming in at the same time, you can process or track the individual process of that order. So this is the incoming order function, and you see that what it's actually doing is that it's just waiting for 5 seconds before it posts this new event. So this actually doesn't do anything, but it's sending events back and forth through Event Grid, and new subscribers will act upon that. One key little thing is that if you're going to use PowerShell with Event Grid and Azure Functions, you know that it isn't supported out of the box, but you will have to validate the event coming when you are coming from Event Grid when you are first setting up the subscriber. So then you have event grid posting your subscription validation event, and then you have to return a validation code with a status code of 200 OK. Then you only have to do that once, but and if you are using C# or other languages and choosing event grid as incoming or the trigger, you will have Azure have already done this for you. So, but if you're using PowerShell, you have to create this response. So the next scripts are almost the same. It's they are sending. Sorry, there's a process here. So the next event will be process the order, and then this one is waiting for 10 seconds just to simulate something, and then saying that sending a new event saying that the order or the pizza is processed for further to have another. Then you're going to the cook event. So the subscription for sending the pizza to cook, it's listening to the processed suffix. You can see that over. It's. So let's just try to send one event and see if we can link everything together. There we can see that I have the first event in this process. We have event grid are asking us for a unique event ID. Then I'm going to pass in a GUID. And it also wants the date time in a sortable.
Hey, Martin, I think we lost your audio.
Hello?
Great, you're back. We lost you there for like 30 seconds or something.
Okay, sorry. Where did you lose me?
Right after the event ID.
Okay. So then it's you can hear me now?
Yes, good.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, it is the event grid is expecting us to send event ID and also the event dates or event date time in a sortable format. Other than that, you don't have to put in any other metadata for event grid itself. But the data you are going to process in your automation system is going to be sent in the data property here, the data object. So this pizza order is actually for a hungry guy called David Dennison, and is ordering a New Yorker with extra ham and cheese. And he wants this shipped to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C. When you have your JSON body constructed, you can, in whatever language you're using, I'm using PowerShell, however, it's the scope for my session, but then you just post the whole event to event grid. And if event grid has a subscriber for this subject and the event type, it will just immediately pass it to its subscriber via Azure Backbone. So you have some like 2 millisecond latency between event grid and your subscriber. Of course, you can count in without counting in Azure function cold starts and stuff like that, but you are accessing Azure backbone, so you will have sort of no latency in between. Let's just try to send this event and jump straight in the event grid view. So let's see. Yeah. So now you see that I have one event coming in, or actually two. You have the event ID, and that's getting pizza order ID, and you have our customer and the pizza order he sent. So already, since I only had a 5-second delay, you'll see that I also have pizza order 783 in process now. You can see that all subscribers or Azure functions are sending messages back and forth and picking up where they are supposed to. So now you can see that it's ticking in from new order, and it will soon end up. Yeah, you have under delivery here now, and the last step is actually delivered. That is the concept, that you link together the whole business process and sending the messages back and forth to event grid. That is actually the whole demo. I can either answer some questions directly, or I can summarize what we are looking at by jumping back to the slide where the infrastructure is. Sorry, back to this one, and I can. Is there any questions, Anders, coming in?
Not yet, but also if you like, you can just go through this overview again, and also feel free to unmute maybe if you have any questions. Okay, there's a question. How do you handle errors in a process?
In this process, or in this demo, we don't have any error handling, but in the infrastructure that we built up, you can either, if you're using Azure Functions, you can either use say App Insights or Azure Monitor to try and pick up the errors that way, or you can, if you have, if the automation is or the code is actually expecting something, or you can actually validate if you can validate during code, you can post messages back to event grid saying that it has stopped, or there is an error, or maybe, and then maybe present it back to the web form, or whatever started the event or the process in the first place. So it is you can do it multiple ways. Are you trying to error handle the whole chain of events, or are you trying to handle the single automation process within the event? So that depends. So what I tried to demonstrate was that you can have some kind of event producers. In my case, it was just a script, but it could be a web form or a Power App, or something nice and fresh, like Anders is going to show later. And you are sending all events to Event Grid. So Event Grid has that capability to just spoke out to multiple subscribers for the same event. So it makes it easy to either hook up another business process to the same event, or to alter and change the code for one subscriber at a time. Let's say my developers wants to rewrite everything to F# or wherever they are coding in. They can just take one business process, one of the business processes at one time, and use. And since we are using the same CI/CD pipeline, they can just change one of the scripts and have it built out to their standards, one bit at a time.
We have a question here from Roman. How is authentication handled with Key Vault?
In my demo, I wasn't using Key Vault, but in the concept or the production system that we are using Azure Function are authenticating to event or to Key Vault itself, and then it extracts the username or whatever it uses for authentication, and then pass it down on the down row. Yeah.
Great. A new question. Why do you prefer event grid before Azure Service Bus?
This was easier I found it easier to set up, and that was the first thing that I noticed. It was just a one-click setup, and I could choose to, and it's also more reactive than Service Bus that I found. So then you don't have to process in real time. You just have to process when the event arrives in a reactive way. So that was one.
Is it possible to queue the events if a function fails?
No, it's not. So if you're, or at least not that I've seen, but Event Grid works that way that if you have a subscriber, it will remove, and the subscriber are successfully receiving the event, it will remove the event from the queue. So I can show that, not now, but if you are sending, or I actually can't send, show that. If you are sending events with no subscribers, it will just stay in the queue until the subscriber is subscribing to it, and will be there for 24 hours. But it won't queue anything for if something fails. It won't queue as long as it has the subscribers receiving it in the first place. So then you have to handle that in the code, and maybe sending something back to Event Grid saying that it has failed, and then none of the other business processes will kick off because you haven't actually sent the event saying them to start. So these pizza order Ehrnst won't going anywhere since they don't have any subscribers. So they will stay there in the queue, and as soon as I create a subscriber for this, it will be removed from the queue.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Should we switch gears and presenters? So I can.
Yeah, I can stop sharing. Thank you for listening. Now it's time for Anders and Egil to show something a little bit more with the GUI, and maybe you can next time you can create a pizza app for me. Okay?
Sounds good.
Yeah.
And of course, if there's any other questions, feel free to reach out, and we will also put up the slides and maybe some example code in our newly created GitHub repository.
Yeah.
So we will send out a message to you in the user group as soon as we have that in place. Okay, then let me share my desktop. So, are everyone seeing my screen? Just a quick hands up if you can see it. Good. Okay, then it's me and Jan Egil's turn. We are going to talk a little bit about Azure Serverless for business automation, and basically trying to do as much as possible without having to write complex code. My name is Anders Eide. I'm working as a manager in KPMG, and feel free to hook up on LinkedIn or Twitter if you want to stay in contact. And I also just want to mention that we are hiring. So if you like working with Azure, Microsoft 365, or robotics, or basically anything in cloud, feel free to reach out, and we can do a quick talk on possibilities. And Egil, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Egil. I work as a lead architect at Crayon in Norway. I've been working with Azure automation and automation in general for several years. You can also reach me at Twitter. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions after the session.
Good. Today's session is going to be about serverless, basically, and we are going to run some demos about the Power Apps, Logic Apps, Flow, functions, and also how to integrate with Office 365 services like SharePoint Online, and of course also Azure AD, since identity is much of a base in everything these days. But before we begin, I want to just say a little bit about how we came to serverless. In the beginning, we had everything on premises. Everything had to be built from ground up, and then cloud came, and throughout the history, the last 5 or 10 years, we've been working with infrastructure and platform and now serverless as a service directly without having to handle infrastructure at all. So that's maybe one of the biggest advantages with cloud. And Jan Egil, can't you explain a little bit about this slide?
Yeah, before the cloud, before we had all of these options, we had the possibility to spin up virtual servers. That was one era in the server space, that we can just buy a few big physical servers and spin up a lot of virtual machines on top of it. But even if it's easy to spin up one VM, it's still an instance of a server that we need to manage. So we need to think of things like what should we monitor, which ports should we monitor, disk space, CPU, memory usage, backups. There are a lot of things that we have to think about for each server. Security, how many servers do you need for specific applications, scale in, scale out based on holiday seasons and things like that. What size should the physical servers be? When the warranty of the physical server runs out in 3 or 5 years, we need to buy new servers and go through the whole process again. So there was a lot of challenges before the cloud.
Yeah, and then infrastructure as a service came, which kind of helped us. We didn't have to think so much about physical infrastructure anymore, like networking and backup and so on. Now we can just go in the cloud or a service provider, order a okay-sized server, huge set of questions that we also have to handle, like how should we do patching, and what kind of packages and applications should be running on a server to be able to host application code, and not at least how many servers should I have, how should I scale them, and which OS should I be using, and so on and so on. So although it became much easier and a much clearer picture when we are working with infrastructure and architecture, there's still a lot of hassle to make it work perfectly. But then PaaS came, and Egil?
Yeah, platform as a service. Then you don't have to spin up the VMs yourself. You can use platform as a service. One example is Azure SQL, where you just get access to an instance of SQL. But still, you have a few considerations to make. You have to choose the correct size for the servers. There are different SKUs, so you can get more memory if you pay more, for example. You also have to think about how many instances you need, and how do you want to scale it, because there are, of course, constraints in a PaaS service as well. So it's easier than infrastructure as a service. You don't have to think about the operating system, but there are still considerations.
Yeah, and then we had serverless, and that's also what the talking is going to be about today. And we are completely finished with all that thinking about how to build up a server and which kind of operating system it should be running and so on. Now, the only thing we focus on is the application itself and the architecture of the business process that the application is going to be doing. And that's also what serverless is all about. It's abstraction of servers, and everything is more event-driven. And so if something is happening, that event is going to trigger your code and do the tasks, which also enables us to do micro billing, so only paying for just exact things that are going to be processed instead of having to pay something 24/7 or even hours. We are down to seconds and even requests in some cases. So that's definitely some of the benefits of cloud and serverless. You can manage your app and your code instead of having to manage infrastructure and servers, which also makes the DevOps process way simpler. You can just put up your code into maybe some repository and click enable conditional integration and continuous integration and continuous deployment into your solution, which also makes the time to market way shorter. So, Egil, can't you say something about the components that we find in the serverless platform, especially in Azure?
Yeah, sure. There are a lot of different options here. We have Event Grid, which Martin talked about this morning, where you have a single pane of glass to manage all of your events, and you can set up subscribers and handle each event from a different service, such as an Azure Automation Runbook or an Azure Function, for example. In the Azure Function service, it's possible to just define the code like you saw Martin did. He didn't set up any other infrastructure than the code itself. And then we have Logic Apps, which is something that we are going to have some demos about here, which is basically a workflow definition, very similar to if this, then that, and Microsoft Flow, if you have heard about those. So we'll look more into those later on. So basically all of these components makes it possible to focus on the business logic rather than spinning up infrastructures such as a SAN or the physical servers. It's the business logic that is in focus.
Yeah, and this can then be integrated to solutions like databases, storage. You also, of course, you have the security integrations. You can do authentication for all the calls. And it's great for IoT solutions and analytics and cognitive services, because it's always about events. So it's easy to integrate into these. And of course, we have been have done a touch into the development space with quite good IDE support for all of them in either Visual Studio or even Visual Studio Code. And it's, as mentioned, easy to integrate with, easier. Nothing is easy in this world, but it's easier to integrate in a DevOps pipeline. And we have the possibility to do local development and debugging on our devices instead of relying on events and error messages from the server. So that's a little bit about the platform itself. One of the solutions we are going to talk about today is Power Apps. Jan Egil has a great demo on that later. But can we do a quick poll in the chat? How many have been working with Power Apps? Just +1 for if you have been working with it, and maybe a +0 if you haven't. Yeah, we have 1, 2. Okay, so it's actually more people who's not been working with Power Apps. Okay, then you should definitely try it out. It's a great solution to build applications, especially an application that works internally in your organization without having to be an expert in coding. There's very little code, and the code you have is looking very much like the code you will find in, for example, Excel. So basic formulas like if and then and so on. And it can be integrated with a lot of data sources. We're going to see some of the connectors in the next slide. But if you want to create, for example, an application to handle a list in SharePoint, that can be done with just 2 or 3 clicks, and you have an outlined application that you can either deploy directly or modify and add your colors and more logic into it if you begin to get advanced in Power Apps. So with that background, maybe you and Egil can say something about the connectors that we have.
Sure. We have a lot of integrations. I think it's close to 200 connectors to different things. For example, like SharePoint, as Anders mentioned, an FTP server or Dropbox. If a new file is uploaded to Dropbox, you can use that as the source for your workflow, and you can take actions based on it. So I'll dig a little bit more into the scenario where we are writing things to a SharePoint list from our Power App. And then we have a review process, an approval process where someone have to approve an order. And then Azure Automation Runbook will kick off and do the actual logic to do what it's supposed to do. For example, create a user or a virtual machine or whatever your Power App is doing. So yeah, next slide.
Yeah, so we've been touching on how it works, and one of the great benefits of Power Apps is that it's enabled for business users. So typically, maybe advanced workers will be able to build their applications without having to have them approved by IT first. So it's a part of Office 365. You have them in the definitely in the enterprise SKUs. I think you also have them in the business SKUs, and it works with. You have a web application where you build everything connected to the data sources as mentioned, and when you're finished building it, you can publish it to your organization either directly to users or to everyone. And it's an application that you then can run from day one on both the web and mobile, and you can integrate it to SharePoint or other sources if you like. So yeah, if you have Office 365 in your organization, definitely check it out. It's well worked, and it can definitely automate and improve some of your business workflows already now. So some of the scenarios, can you say something about them, Jan Egil?
Sure. So what kind of scenarios are we looking to when we talk about serverless technologies? The answer is anything where there is a need to run some logic in response to an event. For example, creating a new user, like I just mentioned. So there are many different trigger scenarios. It might be something that is based on a timer, such as every 15 minutes, based on some message to a bot, for example, or the backend of a mobile application. So I like to think of this like a big set of Lego bricks that you can put together to build the solution that you need for your customer or your business.
Right. So let's get hands-on and see some real-life applications. So this is a really simple proof of concept that I built. It's basically a flow application with a button that triggers. Let's see if I can build up the slide. It should be this one. Sorry. It's a button that will put a message to a queue in Azure, which will be picked up by a Logic app, which then puts on the request to Azure AD and Microsoft Graph to build out a team. So it's basically order team workflow built solely on serverless without any code at all. So if we step through it, you can see that I have a flow button, which will kick off everything. The flow button has some inputs. I will show them afterwards. And when the user has filled out the form, it will be sent as an approval request to one of those who are responsible for team handling in the organization. If they approve it, the request will be saved to a storage table in Azure and also to a queue. I will go into the queue afterwards. But finally, if all of those steps are succeeded, a notification will be sent back to the user in the Flow app and say that your request was approved and your team will be ready within a few minutes or so. So that's one part of the application. It's living solely on its own, and if the next part of the application should fail, it will just queue up instead of failing on the whole application. So when the flow steps are finished, all the end user steps is also done. Then the end user don't have to do anything more. And the rest is automated in Azure. So a logic app is monitoring in the queue and will pick up the message and parse it and do a request to Azure Table Storage to get the identity that was stored to table in the flow, and based on that do a series of requests to Azure AD to create a group and add a user and so on, and finally go to Microsoft Graph and enable team functionality and be done, and delete the message from the queues so it doesn't happen again. And that's it from the automation side. The rest is handled in Office 365. So when the team is ready, the end user will get a message that he has been added to a new team, and the team will show up in the end user's applications. So let's go into details on how this is working. So let me begin with the flow. So since not many of you had been using Power Apps, how many have been using Flow? Can I get a new vote on that? Just a quick one. +1 if you have used it, +0 if you haven't. Yeah, it's a good mix. Maybe most have not been using it. Okay, good. Let me step into it. The Flow is managed by a web application at flow.microsoft.com. If you have this enabled on your Microsoft 365 license or Office 365 license, you can basically begin using this from day one. There is some caveats. So if you have enabled this on your organization without having done the risk assessment, you may want to consider disabling it again, because if you don't know what you're doing, you can do bad things with Flow. If you go into editing, you can see that I basically have a button, and I'm requesting the team name, a team description, and also a justification for why you want this team. Recently, they have also added a yes/no option in the flow. That's definitely something that I will add to my demo next time, where I will be able to ask if maybe this team is going to be a public team or a private team, which is also enhancing the experience for the user from day one. Then get an approval. I'm sending the approval directly to myself just to make it simple with the details, and I can also add more information about the requester and so on if I want. Then, based on response, if it's yes, insert the identity in Azure Table, add it to a queue, so I know where to look it up in the table afterwards, and then finally notify the user that the request for team was approved, and it will be ready within 5 minutes or so. If it's not approved, notify the user that it was not approved and maybe why it wasn't. When that's finished, a Logic app will take over. How many has been using Logic app? Can I get a quick poll on that one? +1, +0. Yeah, basically the same. Good. This Logic app is pulling the queue every 1 minute to see if there's something new. And if it's something new, it will parse JSON, which is the message in the queue, and pick up the partition key and a row key from Azure Table Storage, and then go and get the entity in that table. from that entity, I will pick up the team description, the team name, and also do some logic to make the nickname for the team. And I'm making sure that it's a unified Azure AD group, which basically means Office 365 group. It's mail enabled and it's not security enabled. So it will end up as an Office 365 group. If that succeeds, I will go pick up the user requesting the team from Azure AD and add that user to the group. So the user will be in the group from day one. At least it was that the user requested it, so it should be so. And also, that's something I'm missing in this connector. It's not able to make the group request an owner of the group. So then I'm using one of my new favorites within the connector families in Azure AD, Azure Logic App, which is basically just send a request, web request. So I'm requesting a graph endpoint and adding the requester as an owner of this team. And then finally, do a put message to the group and enable Teams functionality. And here I can also, for example, disable the possibility to add or remove apps and so on the team from day one. And if everything succeeds, I go ahead and just delete the message from the queue, and which prevents this logic app from running again. If some or any one of these steps should fail, the queue won't be deleted, so it will be retried again 1 minute later. So that's basically the flows and the logic app. So let me try to do a quick demo on this. So if I can just stop presenting, and I will bring up Air Server and share my phone, because this flow app is working perfectly on your phone. So I will open productivity on my screen and open flow. And in this flow app, I'm now signed in as a demo user. So I will find a button on my phone, which is request team, add a team name, the team description, and a justification, and then click done. So 3 simple steps for end user to just request a new team. If I've been signed in on my phone with my Ehrnst account, I would now have a notification saying that I have to approve this request. But since I don't have that, I will open it in my browser instead. I can see I have a request for a new team. So by clicking approved, I can add a comment and confirm, which will then put a message to the queue. So if I click, I can see that it's have been approved, and I can go pick up the partition key and row key. So within a minute, my logic app will pick up this one and then go to the table in Azure Storage and also pick up the details here. Make sense? Please stop me if I'm doing it too quick. Then just ask and I will try to answer. I can see the chat on my other screen here, so it should be okay. Going back to logic apps, we should be seeing running quite soon. It's checking every 1 minute. So maybe we have to wait a little bit.
You can also just,
okay.
Yeah, I was just going to say that you could press the run trigger button to do it right away, but yeah.
Yeah, but that's cheating. Yeah. Okay, just kidding. Okay, so you can see it running and going through the steps of my logic app. So we can see that all the steps have been succeeded. If something failed, I can bring up one from the past. It was a way simpler app then. We can see it failed there, so it wasn't deleted. But since everything succeeded, we can see that it created a group. That went perfectly. It was able to fetch the user requesting the team, adding the user to the group, add the user as a owner of that group, and then finally enable team functionality. And since that all the steps was succeeded, the message was deleted from the queue. So if we go back to the queue, you can see it's empty, and we still have the request in this table. So the table can be used for example, auditing, or you can add additional data to it when the team has been created. That's basically up to your own creativity and your business needs. So Office 365 is handling the rest. Quick question here from Harald. How about testing pipeline and site conditional integration? Yeah, conditional integration is quite painful with logic apps. You have to do a lot of extra steps, like getting a token, for example, for connections that are going to be authenticated to Azure AD and so on. So it is possible. It's not easy, but if you have to do conditional integration and conditional deployment, it's possible. But it will take some testing to be able to have it succeed. And testing pipeline, yeah, I'm normally just doing testing in a separate resource group against a testing subscription. There's no way to do simulated testing against a production environment. When your luggage app is firing, it's doing exactly what it's supposed to do, and it's not a purpose or just try feature in it. So you have to test either on a dedicated testing environment or just be confident that it will work. Manual testing only then, yeah. Well, if you do conditional deployment into a testing environment, you will get notification if something fails, but you won't know if it's failing before you actually have tried it in some kind of live environment, either than in production or dedicated test. So the team should be ready now. So if I are able to bring up my browser with my demo user, yeah, you can see it, that the demo user has been notified that he's been added to a team. In this case by me, because the service account running the connector is my own account. And you can see that the team has showed up in the group section in Outlook. So if you open teams.microsoft.com, we should also be able to see that the team functionality has been added to the group and showing up in teams.com. Multiple times. Okay, there it was cleaned up. I've been testing with the best team name URL also. So that's it. It's completely automated and integrated with the approval process team ordering solution for your business. And it's something that you can build in an hour or two, or when you're a little bit experienced with Teams, with Logic apps and Flow. And also, if you like to read APIs, API definitions, you are able to communicate with Graph in addition. So that's my demo. Jan Egil, do you want to take over? I know you have a little bit more advanced demo with.
Well, it's just a different scenario with different technologies. We're using much of the same technologies. So let's just jump into the presentation first and talk a little bit about the scenario and one more service that we have not introduced yet. The service is Azure Automation. That is basically our cloud service in Azure that makes it possible to manage and run runbooks that can be either PowerShell runbooks or Python runbooks that you can run on a Linux server. To automate anything that you can do in PowerShell or Python, you can basically do from Azure Automation. There are many options here to run things. Many people think about Azure Automation as automation of Azure itself, but it's not only Azure. You can basically run and execute a runbook to run everywhere. So we have this concept of a hybrid worker. A hybrid worker is basically any Windows server with the Microsoft monitoring agent installed, or a Linux distribution with the Microsoft monitoring agent for Linux installed, that is onboarded to or attached to a Azure Automation account using the Powershell command that you can see in the bottom here. So when you start a runbook, you can basically choose between running it in a sandbox worker in Azure or run it on that custom hybrid runbook worker that you have set up. So this can, of course, be a regular virtual machine running in your data center if you want to automate processes against on-prem resources, such as Active Directory or a local SQL server or whatever it is. So this is one of the things that I'm going to show in the demo, Azure Automation. A little bit before we jump to the demos, a little bit about the scenario I'm going to show. The front end will be a Power App, so you can see how that works. The Power App will store the input from the user into a SharePoint list. Then we will have a Logic App, which is listening for new items added to the SharePoint list. That Logic App will in turn create an approval request. When the request is approved or denied, it will continue, and if it's approved, it will trigger an Azure Automation runbook that will actually go ahead and create a new user account in Azure AD in this example, but it might as well have been a user in a local Active Directory or whatever your scenario is. So let's just jump over to the demo. We have the demo environment here. Just let's start with the Power Apps first and just do an order so it can go in the background while we look at the other things. So you access the Power Apps from web.powerapps.com. When you go into here, you will get a list of all of the applications that you have access to. So there are, as a regular user, you will just see the applications that you have access to. Here you can see that I have one app already pre-created called User Onboarding. So I will just go ahead and first go into edit mode, so we can look how the authoring experience look like. This is pretty much what you see is what you get editor. If you remember from the good old front page days when you created HTML pages from scratch, it's much of the similar concept that you just have to drag and drop buttons, images, basically create a layout for the application to fulfill the business needs. So here we have a Power App that is for user onboarding. So here we can see that we have the possibility to insert multiple screens. You can see this is screen 1, here I have screen 2, here I have screen 3, for example. So when a new request has been created, for example, you can have a transition to a confirmation screen telling the user that a request has been registered and with some information. And when you insert, for example, a button like we have done here, you can tell in the formula here what the button is going to do. So, for example, it's going to navigate back to browse screen 1, which is this screen. So it's pretty easy to set up screens, images, actions. Then we have the concept of data sources. So this particular application is attached to a SharePoint list. Here you can see that we can add many different connections. For example, if the application is only using static data, you can just import an Excel spreadsheet. You can connect it to Azure Resource Manager. You have the concept of a common data service that is for storing data in a generic service in Power Apps itself, and for example, the SharePoint that we are connected to here. So basically, when we are going to the edit screen and press the button here, you can see that the form is submitted to the SharePoint list. The edit form is attached to the SharePoint list, and the user will then be sent to the confirmation page. So this is basically the application. If you have a quick look at the SharePoint list as well, building this Power App was pretty easy because here you can see that we have a pretty basic SharePoint list that we can add items to. So if you click this Power Apps button here and press create an app, you will basically get a pre-layout app that looks much like what you saw here, but you can customize it. You can insert your company logo, custom text, and things like that. So all of the wiring to the SharePoint list, for instance, is pre-made for you. So it's very easy to get started with this. You can, of course, do it more advanced and build pretty cool power-ups, but to get started, it's you don't really have to spend a lot of time. If you spend, let's say, an hour on this, you will have an application up and running, and you will be pretty comfortable with editing it. So let's go back to just start an app for creating our request. So now I hit the play button. This might as well have been added as a application on my phone. For example, if you go to the store on your phone, you download Power Apps and you sign in with your Azure AD credentials or Office 365 credentials, you will get a list of all of the Power Apps that you have access to, like we saw in the web interface. And then just click on the app, you will get this interface on your phone. It's also possible to add it as a tab on in Microsoft Teams, and yeah, there are many possibilities to publish this to your end users. If we go ahead and create a new request, you just click the plus button to get to the form screen. Go ahead and create a new user account. We search who should be the manager. This is searching for all users in the Azure AD tenant. You can choose category. All of these things is business logic that you need to build for your company. So this is specific to this Crayon demo company, but of course you could you have to set up, for instance, departments and things specific for your company. So let's just go ahead and press the submit button in the right corner. Now there should be a new request saved in the questionnaire. Given that your test environment resets in That's a good point. Regarding test environments, if you divide test and production based on a subscription, references to Azure AD will, of course, work. Okay, so let's refresh the SharePoint list and see if we have a new entry created. Here you can see that that the data submitted to the Power App was basically written to the SharePoint list. I have deleted the previous entries, so this is why it got the ID of 17, because I deleted the previous 16 test users. So now we have the request stored in SharePoint Online. Next, we're going to have a look in Azure and find the logic app that is listening for new items added to that SharePoint list. So here we have a user onboarding logic app. Let's go into the designer for this app to see how it is built. So at the top here, we should see that it's listening on a specific, when a new item is created, the site address and then SharePoint list name, and how often will it check for new items. It's every 3 minutes. Next, it will go ahead and look in a different SharePoint table that we have defined here. It's a company table. It might as well have been a department table to look up, for instance, metadata about the company, such as the postal address, who is the CEO, or who should be the approver for the request. Any kind of metadata that you have about the company, you can dynamically get here, so you don't have to request the user for input. So it's basically looking up the company in the step that we saw there. Next, it will go ahead and send an email to the CEO for the company that it got from the company SharePoint list. In this case, it's my user, and it will send an approval email where the options is approve or reject. And here it will sit and wait for approval before it continues to the next step. That is either approved or denied. If it's denied, it will just send an email to the requester that the request was denied. But if it's approved, we're going ahead and starting a new Azure Automation runbook, which contains the PowerShell code for creating a new user in Azure Eide. So here you can see we choose subscription, research group, automation account, and runbook name. And then we have three bottom properties here are dynamically added here. It's the parameters from the runbook. So if you bring up the runbook, you have it here. You can see that I defined three parameters in the runbook. So you have to specify the SharePoint list name and the SharePoint list employee ID. That is ID 17, so that the runbook knows what list item to look up, to which user is going to create. So basically all of these three properties will dynamically show up in the Logic app, so you can inject data to it dynamically. So here you can see we're passing the ID, which we got from the first step when an item was created. So this will basically be ID 17 in this case. So let's go ahead and see if the job has triggered. It's running every 3 minutes, you can see. Now it's triggered an instance of it. So you can see that it's running and it's probably waiting for approval. Let's just have a quick look. So it's past these steps and it's waiting for the approval step. So if you go ahead and check my email, if there come some more requests. Not that one. Here you can see that since I'm the approver, I got the approval email, but I'm also the requester, so I got the information email about that the onboarding request will continue when somebody has accepted the approval. Let's just go ahead and press approve to approve it, and go back to the Logic app and see what happens there. Now you can see that it turned green. It has already run the switch, so the job in Azure Automation is created with these parameters. As you can see here, number 17 is the ID. So if you are quick and go into the Azure Automation account, you should see that a new runbook job has started. So this is the automation account. Then we're going into runbooks. And we should see the runbook that is called new Azure AD user. There it is. And if you go into jobs, we will see each instance of the runbook that has been started. And there we can see that it's one that started now at 10:15. So it was just launched by the Logic app. So if we first have a look at the input, what the parameters were sent, we should see the same values as we saw in the Logic app, ID number 17. And if we go ahead and look at the output, we will see output from, like if you run this in a regular PowerShell console, you'll basically see everything that the runbook is doing, logging to a file, getting items from the company data in SharePoint. So for example, the street address is dynamically added to the new user in Azure AD. It calculates what should be the user principal name and all of this data for the user, what licenses to assign to it, and so on. And then you can see that based on the business logic for my fictional company, it's adding it to different groups. For instance, for getting licenses for Office 365, it's being added to some group-based licensing groups. Doing some stuff in Exchange Online, updating the SharePoint list, and then sending an email with the new username and password to the requester. So if you go back to the SharePoint list, we should see that the status field is updated, that the workflow has been completed, and you should see that an email was received with both the log file of all of the steps that we saw happen. So if an error has occurred, the requester can see it himself, and the initial password, random password that will need to be changed on the first logon. This could, of course, be a much more fancy email with some HTML and logos and stuff, but it's just for a simple demo purpose. And now we should, if you go into Azure AD or the Office 365 portal, we should see that the user is actually been created. go into the portal, and it should also have been assigned licenses for Office 365 E3, so it's up and running with the email and SharePoint and Teams and all of those services. Let's just search for the user here. And there is, and you should see that it's been added to the user groups that you saw, and it's gotten, it's not processed Office 365 yet, but if you wait a couple of minutes, it should be processed by the group-based licensing feature in Azure AD and gotten a license for Exchange and the other services. That was basically the main demo. One thing that I also can mention here is how we handle the code for all of this. I hope that everyone is using some kind of source control, and in this case, I'm using Visual Studio Team Services. There I defined a project called Crayon Demo Automation, which I use for different things, mainly for storing the source code, but also for continuous integration and continuous deployment. So here, for example, you have many features that you can use in Visual Studio Team Services. For example, for setting up the scenario, for instance, create a self-service solution for onboarding users, where you can discuss with your team members how should the solution look like, what is the acceptance criteria. And then you can divide the user story into different work items, such as create a runbook, create a Power App, create a SharePoint list, and so on. So you get some structure around the project. And you can also use this after the initial launch, of course, to report bugs and check what you're going to do. And code, here we have the Git repository for the project. So here you can have set up on structure where I have the runbooks in a specific folder. So here you can see the source code for the Powershell runbook that we just created the user. Of course, you can clone this to a local copy on your laptop so that you can work with it in your favorite editor, for example, Visual Studio Code or Powershell ISE or whatever you prefer. There you can see that you get the runbook in a local console where you can test and debug your application. So if you have a quick search of searching for a new Azure AD user, you should see that somewhere here. Here you can see that this is the command that will actually create the user. But beforehand in the runbook, we have a lot of logic to, for instance, create a PowerShell object with all of the calculated properties for user data and a random password and things like that. So if you are familiar with PowerShell, this is it's regular PowerShell basically. It's nothing magic going on here. Also, I wanted to show you, if you have a couple minutes left, the continuous integration. If you're building software, of course, you're used to compiling it, for instance, a source code into an exe, for example. That's not something that we are doing here, but we are using the release feature of Visual Studio Team Services so that we can automatically publish updates out to Azure Automation instead of going to the portal. For example, if I'm working with a runbook here in the portal and do some changes, instead of going into the editor here and manually upload my code changes, we use continuous integration. So if you go to the ESTS, we can see that we have a release pipeline called Publish Runbooks to Azure Automation. If you go and have a quick look how that looks, you'll basically see that it's based on the artifact called the Crayon Demo Automation Git repository. Since we have this button here, the continuous deployment button enabled, it will create a release for each Git push to the master branch of this repository. Here I have defined one environment called production. In a real environment, I would of course have at least a test environment and maybe a QA environment. But in this production environment, I have 4 tasks. The first one is run pester test. Pester, it's a test framework for PowerShell, so you can test your code for logical errors and all kind of tests you can set up, integration tests, and so on. When those tests have been run, you can see that they are run from the repository that's cloned on the invoke pester test. When that's run, you can publish the results back to VSTS in a format called NUnit so that it can be displayed and analyzed by the platform. If the tests are succeeded, you can go ahead with the final step, which is publish Azure automation runbook. That is also basically just a PowerShell script inside of the repository. We have a quick look here. We have this script called sync runbooks that will go ahead and for all of the files that's in the runbook folder, it will do a for each loop and publish it to the automation account. So it's pretty simple stuff. That means that if I perform some kind of edit to a file here, fix a bug or add a new feature or whatever, I then go into the Git source control integration here, perform a commit and push it to the repository, and then all of this the pipeline will go ahead and push it out to Azure Automation. So the new version will automatically get published to the environment if, of course, all of the pester tests succeeded. That's basically the demo I had in mind. We can also have a quick look at the flowchart. It's not you're not supposed to be able to read all of this, but it's basically what you should do up front before you start a project like this. Define how the process should or how the flow should look like. For example, here we have a new user request. We have a Power App, which writes to the SharePoint list, which triggers a logic app. We have an approval process, which starts the runbook and all of the things that I just showed you. So this is basically the first thing you should do when you're going to do a project like this. Create the process and the flow, build a flow chart so that you know what you're going to automate. The first rule of automation is that you have to know what to automate because, yeah, you have to define it. Then I think we're going to wrap things up here. Just first have a quick look if there are any more questions. Nothing there. Yeah, as we talked about earlier on, serverless application platform components makes it possible to focus on the business logic rather than having, for example, for the solution that I just showed you, rather than having to set up a number of servers for all of the different things. I was using only serverless services in the Azure platform to perform the actual tasks. And of course, you don't have to use Azure services for everything. If for instance, you prefer AWS Lambdas over Azure functions, you could, of course, trigger an AWS Lambda from Azure Event Grid, so you can mix and match whatever your business needs are, basically. Anders, do you have any more to add before we wrap things up?
I think we have covered it quite good.
Yeah.
And of course, if there's any questions, feel free to reach out to us on both LinkedIn and Twitter, and we'll definitely try to answer as good as you can. And if you should happen to be in Texas in October, please join me at IT Dev Connections, where we'll have a full day workshop on these topics. I just pasted a link in the chat, so you can follow up on that one if you should be able to join. And yeah, should we try to wrap it up with just saying a little bit about what we are trying to achieve with the user group?
Yeah.
This will, yeah. As mentioned in the beginning, we will try to host a new meetup either physically or virtually every month. I know that September will be covered quite good with the Ignite and so on, but yeah, we will try to make something happen either before or just after Ignite also. That's it. If you could stop the recording, Jan Egil, we could do a few minutes